This episode is brought to you by Ardan Labs Education. Sign up today to learn advanced concepts in Go, Docker, Kubernetes, Terraform, and more. Visit ardanlabs.com/education for more information.
Welcome to the Ardan Labs podcast. Today, our special guest is Tim Boring. Hey, Tim, how's it going?
Good. How are you, Bill? Nice to be here.
Good. Where are you coming from?
Physically, I'm in New Jersey, just northern New Jersey, west of New York City.
Oh, I grew up on I call it the island of Long, and moved down to Miami in 90. I call it the island of Long because I went to school in SUNY Potsdam, way upstate. I don't know if there's an area up there called Alexandria Bay, which is like, it's 1,000 islands between the U.S. and the Canadian border, right?
Yeah. We just went across there. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm up in school in like 1988, and I tell somebody I'm from the island, and they're like, "Which island?" And I'm asking them, "What do you mean, which island?" And then they explain to me about like those 1,000 islands. So I just started saying I'm from the island of Long.
Oh, that's awesome. I like that.
All right, cool. So Jersey. All right, amazing. Okay. Tim, give everybody like the 2-minute spiel on what you're doing today, where you are today and what you're doing today.
So I am a senior software engineer at a company called Voltus. I mean, it's what I'm doing for day work. It's a distributed energy company. So we're working on the clean energy transition from like coal power to renewables. So we work in that space. I actually work on the infrastructure team. So we're responsible for the platform for we run the Hashy stack. So we're running Nomad. And then builds and all that kind of stuff. And in my spare time, I'm working on writing a book for Manning. It's called Build an Orchestrator and Go.
Okay, a couple of things after that. After hearing that, is this a private energy company, or are they semi-private? Are they working with the local energy or state with this stuff that you're doing?
We're actually national, so we work in all of the energy markets.
But are you trying to support the grid, the national grid, or are you more consumer based, like with the solar panels that are happening today?
So we're actually getting it a little bit more into the consumer side as well, because this is all starting to kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Converge, I guess.
I'm just kind of interested, like the solar panel stuff is interesting to me. I know you're not doing solar, but it's interesting to me that I can basically put electricity back on the grid. I don't want to go too deep in this. I was just more curious if you were working with the energy, like we have Florida Power and Light down here, right? So I forgot what Con Ed is in the city.
Yeah, right. So those are utilities. And while we do work with utilities, our primary thing is how to explain it. So like I said, we're like a distributed energy company, right? And so there's this thing, like we're about 5 years old, a little bit more than 5 years old. And so the core business was built up around something called demand response, which is the idea that, I don't know how much you know about the grid, but basically like the grid always has to be balanced, right? So whatever the output is, or whatever the input is, the input has to equal the output. So if consumer, on the, whether it's a business or a house, your house, if everybody's drawing, say 100 megawatts, there has to be 100 megawatts of output from, power providers. So that always has to be in balance. So the problem is though, like, the demand is always, it's not always constant. So one way to keep that in balance is to actually ask people to not use as much, to cut consumption. And so that's where demand response comes in. And what we do is we provide a way we work with all of the different, within each region of the country. There are things called ISOs, which stand for Independent System Operators. I hope I'm not botching that. But they're basically the entities that operate the energy market for a region. So I don't know what it is in Florida, but for New York, for example, it's the New York ISO. Texas, if you remember last year with the the issues they had there. That's all run by ERCOT. And so we work with those ISOs to do demand response, and that's we sign up customers, and they say like, hey, we can, if they need us to like cut 100 megawatts, then yeah, we'll do that. Basically, we kind of provide the glue to provide, between the market and the end user.
So FP&L will lower my bill if I allow them to put devices in the house where they can shut things off on demand. Like in the middle of the summer, so that's what it sounds like.
Yes, it's the exact same thing, exact same concept.
Okay, all right, now I got an idea of what that is. Yeah, that's super interesting, right? In fact, I didn't do it because I just don't want somebody, but I think it's one of these weird things, right? It's like, I could see how responsible that is. At the same time, I'm not sure I want you doing that in my home, right? So.
I think it makes sense. I mean, yeah, the consumer side is kind of interesting and I don't work on the business side of things. I mean, I'm in tech, so, but it is interesting being around people that, we have a lot of, for example, analysts for, energy market analysts, and they're like super sharp and know kind of all the ins and outs and, the intricacies of all of these different things. So it is interesting, like just listening to people that are very knowledgeable talk about the industry and kind of what's going on and just all the different options. Also, if you're really interested in it, there's a good book. Actually, there are a bunch of them, but one good book that actually talks about this from a historical perspective is The Grid. It's written by Gretchen Bach. I think I forget. I'm not pronouncing her name correctly, but it's Baake. Yeah, but it's a really good book that kind of goes all the way from like Edison in the late 1800s to now. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, there's too many things going on this planet at the same time to consume it all. But I'm happy that you have an understanding of essentially of the business you're working in, because I get scared sometimes when I ask a developer, what's the problem or the problems your company's trying to solve, and they can't answer it. Like that starts to scare me. And it sounds like you're an engineer, but you're kind of on the more of the ops side if you're working with Terraform or something like that. Or are you actually building product for them?
No, the infrastructure teams isn't building product. Or I guess I guess technically you could say everything's a product, right? It's just a matter of where the focus is, right? Like, is it internal? Is your customer? Yeah. But yeah, I mean, so we're building we build the like platforms that developers use to, build, test, and deploy their code. We build tooling, that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's more on the operational side. We just, we kind of attack the problem from more of like a software engineering perspective, kind of like SRE.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. We're going to get back to that before we're done here, but I want to now get you into the time machine. I want to kind of bring you back to some of the earlier days and kind of hear your story to how we got here into energy. And so the first question I ask every guest is to kind of think back on the first time you were, I'm going to say in this case, using a computer to solve any sort of problem, not just gaming, right? But like, when was that first time the light bulb came on and you were like, oh my God, I just got this computer to do this thing that I've wanted it to do, right? You try to think of that first memory.
Yeah, so I guess depending on how you want to define like do something, I really wasn't into games. I had an Atari, I grew up kind of the same era that you did. So it's like, I had the Atari, was it 2600 or whatever.
When did you graduate high school, Tim? I like that as a kind of marker for things.
89.
89. I graduated 87. Okay, so we're going to have a two. Okay, 89. So that's like you're 17, 18 in 89. Okay.
Yeah. And I wasn't really heavily into computers. I was good in like, math and science and stuff. Really loved physics. And did some, I remember, I think it was either freshman or sophomore year of high school. I had a math teacher and he ran a computer lab. And I'm pretty sure that they were Apple IIes, or Apple IIs. And I remember, during that course, we would, I can't remember if it was weekly or something, but we would go down and we would work on those and we would write. I didn't know at the time, I was like, 15 or something. wasn't the thing that was on top of my mind, but it was kind of cool. I remember liking it. But we went down and we wrote some programs in BASIC to do kind of like some kind of just graphics things that were kind of, I mean, in hindsight was pretty trivial. But and then actually, when I went to college, actually was a
Wait. We're not talking about college yet. Hold on. Don't. This is a marathon, not a sprint. Hold on. Come back, because you said something to me that was interesting. You said this wasn't on the forefront of my mind at the time. So what was on the forefront of your mind at the time in high school?
Sports. I think I played football and baseball. Well, okay, let me back up. Actually, freshman and sophomore year, it would have been, actually I didn't come back to sports. I raced BMX bikes.
That was a big thing back then. Now, you were growing up in New Jersey?
No, I grew up in Ohio.
In Ohio. Okay.
Yeah, I've lived all over the place. But yeah, I grew up in Ohio, and like BMX racing, not the like freestyle stunt stuff. That was like not really that existed then, but it was kind of like I don't know. At least in the circles that I ran in, right? Like that really wasn't.
So I remember Mongoose at the time being like the bike to have. If you had a Mongoose, you were like whatever the term is the kids use today. You were like, I'm going to just say it, you were the shit, okay? If you showed up with a Mongoose, everybody was like, whoa, right? Like I remember that growing up on Long Island.
And by that time, actually, Mongoose was like kind of on the downslide. I mean, because there were a bunch of, I raced from 81 to 86. And then once I got into high school, like freshman, sophomore, I think sophomore year, I played baseball in the spring. And that was when I think I stopped racing and then kind of went full on back into sports. In the spring, I played baseball. And then in the fall, I played football.
So if I put you on a Mongoose right now, could you do the bunny hops?
Oh, I'd probably kill myself.
How much air can we get?
Break my neck or something.
I tried a couple of years ago. I saw a BMX bike and I don't remember where I was, and I'm like, tried to show off doing a little bunny hop, and I think I got like an inch off the ground, but I was still happy about that, right?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I remember, there was like back then, there was actually, it was kind of funny. There were a lot of families. It was pretty much a family, like, because if you're like 11, you can't drive to the race yourself. So, there were a lot of families, and there were actually a lot of parents that actually raced as well. There were older classes, I remember there being, I don't remember exactly what the categories were, but like, there was like 35 plus, group, and there would be, so there'd be like dads that were, their sons were there racing, but the dads would race too.
That's really interesting. Like I never met anybody that was doing that competitively, and we weren't racing. We were trying to kill ourselves. I must have knocked the wind out of myself 3 or 4 times trying to flip off a ramp and fall backwards, And I would run in the house, and my mom would yell, "Go back outside, you're fine." Just
go outside. Don't come back until it's dark.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember breaking my wrist one time, and my mom told me to go back out and play, and I didn't go back out for like an hour, and then she was like, "Maybe there's something actually wrong with it."
Yeah.
Okay, so in high school, then you're really more focused on the same things I was back in the late '80s. I was running track. I was playing baseball. I loved that. I at the time wasn't thinking too heavily about college, though I knew I was going to go, and I knew I wanted to study computer science because I had a computer at home, and that was where I was spending the other time when I wasn't playing sports.
Sure.
It ate up a lot of my time. So was sports kind of eating up the majority of your time, and then what were you doing when you weren't on the field?
Yeah, I think it was the majority. It was the majority of my time. Trying to think. I also worked. Like I had, I don't know. I think pretty much the whole time that I raced. So maybe, and probably a little bit before that, maybe 10, 11. I had a paper route. So I delivered the paper for my street, all the way up until, maybe even during I think it was all the way until at least in high school. And then I had a job at one of the local grocery stores. So I went to school, did practice and stuff afterwards, or did games, and then then worked. Yeah.
I wasn't allowed to have a paper route because my mom said she's not going to drive me on rainy days, and therefore you're not allowed to have one. She was like, no.
Trying to think, I don't remember what. I mean, I do remember my dad took us around. Like, it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't frequent, but I mean, it did. When the weather was bad, I mean, I do remember that either here or my mom. I think it was mostly my dad took us. Drove. But it was also my street, so we didn't have to go that far.
Yeah, that's not bad. Okay, so what's happening then in high school as you're about to graduate? Because I remember at the time, the default was pretty much you go into the military or you go to university. There wasn't much of a choice there. I imagine it was the same for you.
Yeah, no, I was going to college, and I wanted to be. I actually wanted to go into mechanical engineering. That's what I wanted to go to school for because I took, like I said, I was in math and science. I also we had at the time we had pretty strong like VOTech programs, and one of those was there was an architectural drafting class, and then as well as like a mechanical drafting class. And I took both of those.
VOTech being vocational.
Yes, vocational.
That was in your high school?
Yeah.
In that high school or inside
yeah,
high school?
No.
Okay.
No, it did. Now we had some of those classes. I mean, I think it was kind of common at the time, at least in the school district I was in, where you'd have, you had like wood shop, you had like I said, I had like architectural drafting, and then mechanical drawing were the two classes I took.
I remember those classes too. Yeah. I wasn't into it.
But there were also like the outside like VOTech programs that were more involved, where it was like I remember like there was one where you could go and you could do like you could do like learn how to work with CAD and like kind of more professional like
full
drafting.
trade schools.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, full trade schools at night and all that good stuff.
There were those things too.
So mechanical, so that makes sense because you loved physics and you loved math. I mean, computers were still fairly new, right? And so a lot of my friends had the same sort of, they were going to go double E, they were going to do mechanical, I had a friend who went into ceramical engineering, which really ended up not helping because, I mean, how many ceramical engineers, how many jobs are out there for that, right? That makes a lot of sense to me. So what university did you end up getting into or going to?
I went to a small liberal arts college. West Virginia Wesleyan in Buchanan, West Virginia.
So you left Ohio and went to West Virginia to go to university. Did you want to just get away from the house? Was that the goal there, or?
Yeah, I think that was it. Just kind of, I grew up in Columbus. Just wanted to, see a different part of the world, meet different people. It was interesting because you think about. I mean, I remember even thinking at the time it was really weird. It's like, God, this is like central West Virginia, like in the mountains. But there were actually quite. I mean, it was a pretty diverse-ish student population. I mean, we had international students from we had a really good soccer team, and we had a lot of guys from the UK, from Scandinavia. Those were the two that I remember off the top of my head. We had people from, it's the first time I met anybody from New Jersey. We had a pretty strong, like, Northeastern contingent, New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts.
Wow, that's interesting. In West Virginia, I only been to West Virginia once, did some water skiing on some lake, I don't know, but you wouldn't have thought that there was going to be that sort of international diverse.
Yeah. It was, like I said, I mean, like when I went there and started, when I was visiting colleges, and that was, I think, one of the appeals was just the diversity of like, where people are coming from. My freshman year,
Did you know about this university, or did it come in on a mailer? Remember, you used to get all the mailings of these universities, and you're like,
yeah. No, I knew about it because of football. So like I had a really good coaching staff that was very helpful in trying to get players into colleges. Not just, I played with several guys that went, Division I, had full scholarships, but it wasn't just about that. They were trying to, they help people, even if you didn't want to go play sports at college, they tried to help, they really tried to help kids get into colleges, whatever that meant or whatever it might look like. So that's how I came across it.
And you went there to do the mechanical engineering, and
Yeah, they actually didn't have a mechanical engineering program. They had like I forget what they called it. I think it was a pre-engineering degree. So you did all the like pre-engineering, you did more or less all the like kind of prerequisites, like, all the science stuff. And then I think if you wanted to go do, and I did have this kind of thought that's like, yeah, I wanted to do a master's, and then so that kind of sets you up, like if you wanted to do like a master's in like, mechanical engineering or electrical engineering, whatever.
I see. So you want to do your general engineering studies undergraduate, and then your plan was to do something. So, okay. So when you get to university, and now you're taking this degree, are you getting introduced at that point to any sort of computer science and programming, or is it still just heads down?
Yeah, no, there was that. I was really bad at it though. And part of it was like my freshman year, I had the first semester as part of that program, you take calculus, and I didn't have pre-calculus. I didn't, for whatever reason, it's kind of just a weird historical quirk, I think, but like somehow I got off track like in seventh grade. And so by the time I got to senior in high school, like I was like like 1 year short of like taking pre-calculus. Um, so I think it was was it algebra 1, algebra 2, trigonometry, or geometry, trigonometry, and then pre-calc, I think it was. And so I didn't, so it's like, somehow in seventh grade I got off, because I think it was like, they sent you home with like some form. It's like, well, what track do you want to be on? What track do you want to be on? Like this track will go to put you in pre-calculus and whatever. And it's like, I was in seventh grade. It's like, I have no idea. Like, what does this even mean? So yeah, so when I got to calculus the first semester, it was like, that was kind of like an eye opener and like pretty deflating, demoralizing. Ended up dropping that. I tried to stick with the program. I mean, I took physics and I did fine in that. And then ultimately ended up switching majors to English and double majored in secondary ed. And thought I wanted to.
Wow, when did you do that?
I think that was I think it was my sophomore year, because I think by the end of my first year, I was kind of like, okay, this isn't going to work. Because I think it was the second semester where I had this is my first programming class, and it was we're doing everything in Fortran, and it was so frustrating. Like I couldn't get any, like, I mean, I went through the whole semester and I could not get like a single program or any, to like compile and like work. And I was just like, oh my God, it was so frustrating. So yeah, I kind of like gave up on that, and then kind of switched thinking, and actually thought that I wanted to do a PhD in English. And I did do a master's. I went to grad school. And
so at that point, are you thinking, I want to be a professor now, or I want to write the next great American novel, or?
Yeah, that was the idea. I think there was also the idea of like wanting to write, fiction, short fiction, but I think mostly it was about, being an English professor.
Now, this is the first time I'm hearing about writing. So was this something that you discovered while you were in university that you felt like you were good at or you enjoyed? Or was there anything back from high school?
No, I can't say it was anything like in high school in particular. I think it was mostly a function of just in college, being exposed to, just being exposed to the literature as part of the coursework. Also, just being an English major, it's pretty heavy. It's pretty heavy in writing. There weren't a lot of like, it wasn't a lot of like, multiple choice, or it was a lot of writing essays, writing research papers.
Right, but something attracted you to that at some point in university, right? Like you just kind of gravitated there. It was interesting.
I think in part it was because of I had a professor my freshman year, like and I had a professor, Dr. John Saunders, and I don't know. I think I was just fascinated. I mean, he was just interesting. Very, I just thought like he was very smart. He was, for the course we did, while we did we wrote papers, but it was all writing about, like, we were reading fiction and then writing our papers about, the stories that we were reading and stuff like that. Yeah, I think I was just fascinated by, like, I think it was the first time in my life that I'd met. Well, I guess it's not true. I was gonna say it was the first time in my life where I met like a male, an older like male like figure that was like intellectual. But I guess that's not totally true, because I mean I had that in high school. I guess it's just I didn't have the same.
Well, there was something about this guy that impressed you, right? And there was something about this guy that you felt like maybe it's cool to go down this track, right? Where before maybe it wasn't cool. This guy just proved to you like, hey, I could do that. I could be this guy. I like this. This is interesting. So do you end up graduating with this? You end up graduating with the English degree. And what did you had a minor again in?
Oh yeah, double majored in English and secondary ed. I really quickly, I knew by my senior year I was not going to do like K through 12. I did my student teaching, and that was like it was like, so was it once? No, it wasn't one semester. I think it was like 50 days of actual teaching. It's like 20. I think I did 25 in like 7th grade, and 25 in senior, like 12th grade English. Yeah, the 7th grade, those 25 days in 7th grade were like the worst of my life. That was awful.
No, that 13, 14 year olds
it was awful.
They shouldn't put they should put no educational students with 13 and 14 year olds. My daughter, who's about to graduate with an education degree from USF, was in the classroom for a year with these kids, and she said, "Dad, I don't want to be a teacher anymore." And then Eric, one of the guys that help us with the podcast, his wife graduated with the same thing. She did 1 year in middle school, and she said, "I'm done," and went into a boot camp, and now as a sophomore. You cannot put new teachers with 13 and 14. That's the age where they know that they just get a peanut butter and jelly sandwich if they get in trouble, and they push to. There's no consequences at that age, right? Oh my God! So I get it, right? Like that's.
I can laugh at it now. It was not funny at the time. It was not a good 25 days, but I can laugh at it now.
Yeah, you can look back at it now, but they've got to stop putting new teachers in those classrooms. Okay.
Or you just know that that's like a gap year, right? That's like, 13, 14, they're not learning anything. You just put them, kind of warehouse them and like, wait till they grow out of that phase, and then you can like pick it up from there.
It's almost like you have to try to teach these kids, but at the same time you're trying to, I don't know, control them, corral them. I don't know what the words are.
Yeah. Well, you're also, it's like, I mean, I was like 22 myself, right? It's like I'm trying to figure out like what, which end is up, and then, you're there with like 14-year-olds, and it's like.
I taught 13 and 14-year-olds for 10 years. I taught religious education. And after 10 years, I was completely burnt out. But about 7 years in, I would tell the kids day one, there's nothing you're going to do to me that I haven't seen already. I know all your games, so bring it, but you're not going to win. And you'd always have the one kid that would try to bring it, and within about 3 weeks, we would be friends, and it would. But that took 7 years of like you almost need a class in education to deal with 13 and 14-year-olds. They're missing it. Okay, so you graduate university, you have your double major. Is your goal still now then to go to graduate school?
Yeah. I went to grad school for English Lit, and I stayed in West Virginia. I went to Huntington Marshall University. So I was there for 2 years and finished my master's there. And that's when I think it was my second year where I realized, again, kind of one of these moments where I realized, it's like, okay, this isn't going to work. Like I'm not going to go on to a PhD. And that was about, really about.
So this is like 1995, right? You finish all this education?
Yep. And that was really about money. I remember having a conversation with one of my professors and asking them, like, okay, so, and I had debt. I mean, I had, because I had, my family were like blue collar. We didn't have like money saved up to like go to college. It was all like either I had scholarships or I had loans. So I had student loan debt, and in grad school, I remember, I think it was my second year, I asked one of my professors, so like, because I'm thinking forward, right? Like, okay, I've got, this is my last year. What am I going to do after this? I'm thinking, maybe I do want to do a PhD. But then I asked one of my professors, like, okay, well, so let's say I do I finish my PhD, come out, I'm looking for jobs. Like, what's like just ballparkish, like what can I expect what can I expect to make like salary wise? And they said, again, this is like 1995 and also in West Virginia. And they were like, well, it'd probably be about like 25,000 a year. And I was like, I started doing, in my head, I'm started doing the math. And it's like, wow, okay, that's really like, those numbers don't add up. Like I can't, like how am I, I've got, like I said, I've got student loans. I would have rent. I have, feed myself, like transportation to wherever, whatever, wherever I would have to go for work. It's like, yeah, I don't like this math doesn't add up. Yeah. And that was, again, this was just conversation and it was like ballparking, it wasn't like, it wasn't like, oh yes, we're going to hire you at this university, but it was, mainly I was just trying to get a sense of, are we talking like $50,000 or are we talking $10,000?
So then what do you do at that point? You must feel like, okay, I just did all this education. I'm trained in all of this. And now how do I leverage this in an industry that wants to pay me more?
Yeah. So I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I mean, I had like a, kind of a moment of irrational thought where I'm like, oh, I'm going to go to Alaska and like work on a fishing boat for a while or something. I didn't do that because I was like, and there was just a like random thought in my head and I had no way to figure out like how to even execute that. But,
Tim and I, dude, we are so similar because
did you go to Alaska?
Your story is really similar to mine. No, but I had this crazy idea to go to Australia, and I sent out God knows how many resumes. I bought this book of companies in Australia, and I sent out God knows 100 or something resumes. Got nothing back. But if one had said yes, dude, I was on a plane. And it was the same thing. Like I feel you, dude. Like I feel this 100%.
At the same time, I met my wife, and we ultimately decided to move to New Orleans.
From what was in New Orleans? You went from West Virginia. You keep moving south.
Yeah, she had a friend down there that lived there, had moved down there with her husband, and we figured, we were kind of both kind of in a similar situation where we were like, kind of trying to figure out like, okay, well, what's the next step? And then, so we thought like, okay, well, let's move somewhere. Where would be, I don't think we had like a real plan. Like we were just thinking like, oh, well, where would be fun to go? Like I don't know that we thought about it this deeply, but it's kind of like, okay, well, we're young and like, we don't have really anything tying us down. So where would we want to go? And so we decided on New Orleans.
And you're highly educated. You both have these graduate degrees now.
Yeah, so we picked New Orleans because we at least knew somebody there. So we were there for 6 months and then we moved back. It was pretty hard to get a job. Like she worked at a bookstore. I worked at a map and print shop, which is kind of cool. That's where I first learned that Texas was actually an independent country back in, what was it, 1839 or whatever it was. I think it was the first time I ever knew that.
I didn't know that
so,
at all.
It was kind of cool learning some like stuff like that, looking at just working around maps and then like seeing kind of how, how the political geography changes across time.
That business doesn't even exist anymore. Those were the printing businesses and they're gone.
Yeah. I actually should look and see. I haven't actually gone back and see if that little shop is still there. It'd be interesting if it was. But yeah, then we moved around a little bit. Ultimately, we ended up back in West Virginia, and then my wife started a writing business. She actually has a degree in journalism, undergrad, and so she started a business doing like commercial writing, where she started out doing like writing like annual reports for nonprofits, doing like newsletters and stuff like that. And then I joined, and it was like I quit my job and then joined that. We did that for 2 years.
So is that like around 96? In 96, you're back in West Virginia?
That was 90. Yeah, well, we came back to West Virginia in 96, and then I think she started that in 98. And I think it was like later in the year, the next year, like I joined and we worked together on that. And that's where
What were you doing before you joined the business? So, that's a...
I was doing some writing, didn't make any money, but was doing like I was trying to do like some fiction writing, and was doing some editing, of like some small like literary journals like that were on at the time. I remember there was like this online. I don't even remember what the name of it was, but I was doing editing for this online literary magazine.
But then in '98, the both of you decide that, okay, you're both going to focus on this business that your wife started.
Yeah. And so we did that for 2 years. And that's where that's kind of where I got into computers, I would say, for real. We had a client that, we were focusing on the writing side because we both had backgrounds in writing. But we had this one client that asked us if we could write content for their website. And I remember, us thinking, well, like, yeah, it's still words, it just happens to be digital and not like physically, or printed on a page. I mean, why wouldn't we be able to do that? So we did that work, and then that turned into them asking us like, well, hey, could you like redesign our website for us? And I, we said sure, and I kind of dove in and was like, taught myself HTML, a little bit of JavaScript.
So let me ask you that, because this is like, now you're talking about the year 2000.
Well, no, this was 98, 99. Because by 2000 we were done with it. We were like, okay, this is.
So in '98, you have a client asking you about building out a website. Now, did you start having flashbacks of Fortran? Like, do I really want to do this again? Do I want to have this pain again?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't think I did. I don't think I did. I thought it was kind of interesting because it was like learning something new, right? And I think by that point, like I'd already been through undergrad and grad school, which in hindsight, like the interesting thing is that it did actually teach me to like, it taught me how to think, right? Like taught me how to do research, taught me how to write. So those are all things that you need, like really with any job, I think. I mean, whether you're writing software or you're, I don't know, mechanical engineer or, teacher. I mean, these are all like, figuring out how to do something, right? Like it's like, cause you can have an idea, but then like, how do you execute on the idea? So yeah, I don't remember thinking about it in the same way or the same frame of mind as like that freshman year with Fortran. I thought it was, thinking about it now, I mean, I think I thought it was like, kind of exciting. It's learning something new. It's like, and again, like I'd just been through grad school. So it's like, oh, this is like research, I can figure out.
So you ended up redesigning the website, and you got it published, and you got all that done.
Yep.
And you wanted to do more of that after that? Was that like?
Yeah, I think, and then I got into Linux, and started. I forget how I even came across it. It might have been like.
Was that because you had to host these websites? That's what I would have meant.
No, we actually didn't do any. No, we actually didn't do any hosting. Like I said, by 2000, the business really wasn't going anywhere. We had tried a couple different things, and because it was just the two of us, and we were realizing like, okay, like there's only so much work that we can do, and so like if we wanted this to be like a long-term thing, it's like we had to figure out, some different strategies for how to make this like viable long-term. And we tried a couple different things, and nothing really kind of stuck. And so we decided to move. We moved again. We've moved a lot. So we moved back to Ohio. We moved back to Columbus just because I had family there. And so we had, again, kind of like, no, she's originally from Charleston, West Virginia. But when we moved back to Ohio, that's when I got like 2000. So I got into, somehow I picked up Linux. I forget how. Maybe I went to like, for whatever reason, maybe I was like, maybe we needed a home PC. And I think maybe I went to the store to like, look and see what the prices were. What was it?
But you have to get a job if you're moving back to Ohio. So what's the first job that you get now in 2000?
Oh, I worked. The first job when I moved back was I got a help desk job for a company that was doing what were they? Oh, it was this company called Longaberger. I don't know if you ever heard of Longaberger baskets.
So you've kind of given up on the writing at this point, and you say, I'm going to stay in tech, and you saw this, and you said, you know what, this is going to help me learn.
Yeah, so I got a help desk job supporting this piece of software that this company had for, selling these baskets. And then from there, I went from there to like, I got a different help desk job at another company and did, that one was probably actually more critical because there it was interesting. That's where I first came across, I think, like a real like production Unix system. We had an HP 9000 that's running HPUX. and that ran our financial system, payroll and all that kind of stuff. But nobody wanted to touch it because it was big. This was like 2000, 2001, whatever it was. The big thing was, web stuff was being big. And so we actually had the majority of our small, like 10, I think we were 8, 9, 10 people, IT department. And the majority of the people we had were software engineers that were working on building they were building a new kind of billing and scheduling system. The company did cabling installing, like, Cat5, voice, all that kind of stuff. And it was nationwide. And ultimately ended up, I think we got bought by like Radio Shack. So we were a subsidiary of Radio Shack. But so they were building this kind of like time and billing system, and it was all like web based, and so that's what everybody, that was kind of the new hotness, and so everybody wanted to focus on that. Like nobody wanted to touch the Unix system. I remember my manager was like the only one that knew how it worked, and like I said, I'd been like kind of tinkering with Linux on the side, and so I was like, well, hey, if you don't want to do that, I'll do that. And so that was kind of like my first, real foray into, I think, like system administration. And then from there, I moved on to another company, and I was there for 4 years and more of like system administration.
But it's the same thing. You were working on these because at the time that was the big thing. IBM, Sun, and HP, every 6 months were putting out the next big mini frame. I remember. I forgot the term we used, but it wasn't a mainframe. It wasn't a desktop PC. It was like this. I called it a mini. But I remember being at a healthcare company where every 3 months we would change the Sybase. We would run Sybase to run this patient system. And every like 3 to 6 months, when the next vendor came out with the bigger box, we would buy it and migrate it. So I learned IBM, HP, and Sun, and we were just...
Yeah. A funny story about kind of along those lines is where I was at this company where I, like I said, first learned about like Unix, and we had an HPUX system. We were going to upgrade the physical hardware. I don't even remember but we were going from like 500 megabytes of RAM to like a gig, which is like, oh man, this could be awesome. And we upgraded the CPUs, may have upgraded the disk. I don't remember, but this was like a huge upgrade, right? Like it was tens of thousands of dollars. And I think in the process, we also upgraded the OS. But I remember asking, like, before we did this, I mean, like, months leading up to this, I asked my boss, I was like, I said, this is the only machine we have. So like, if this goes, when we do this, like if things don't work, after the upgrade, we're kind of like SOL because we don't have any other, we don't have another system that we can run, or we don't have like a backup or anything like that. And I remember like going on eBay at the time, this is, like I said, this was like 2001. So this was like right after the bubble burst, right? And 2001, or maybe it was right before the bubble burst. At any rate, there was like a major, like there was just the market was like flooded with like HPUX or HP 9000s, different. I think you're right. I think they were called mini computers. I think they were minis, but there's just like hundreds of them, right? And they were like cheap. I mean, I remember finding them for like $500, and I went to my boss and I was like, dude, we could get like for $500, like we could get the almost exact same system, and we could at least do the software upgrade part of this and like test it. And we're like, no, we can't do that. We can't afford it. So we did the upgrade, and then of course, like after the upgrade, like we spent like the next month like trying to fix it. I think the system was down for 2 weeks, and then it was another 2 weeks. I think we got it up, but then it was like it was still buggy. Then it was another 2 weeks before we got things kind of stabilized. But funny story was I actually did end up buying one for myself. At the time, it was like, because it was one of those ones that was like $500, and my wife and I drove down to North Carolina and brought it back in like a van. It was like, oh my God, like I mean, that was just crazy to think about that, because those things were like,
they were tens of thousands of dollars new at the time.
Oh yeah, what was tens of thousands of dollars just to do that upgrade? So yeah, it was crazy. You could get one for like $500.
I'm trying to remember what company I was at, but they ended up doing that kind of like fire sale with all the routers and the networking equipment and everything, because their business was done. It was just dump. Okay, so at that point, it's interesting because now you're working on these Unix machines, and you're providing support You know what was interesting at the same time, and I was doing some of that for the healthcare company? They started this on-call thing where I could take the phone home at night. I'd get an extra $500
Oh,
for that
wow.
week
Yeah.
to take the phone home, right? Like we said, we'll do it, but we're going to get paid for it. And nobody wanted it. So for like almost a year, I got an extra $1,000 or $2,000 in my pocket. And then somebody started realizing the amount of money I was making, and they all started competing for the phone. I was like, I would get maybe 3 calls a week at night, maybe at most, right? Like it was easy money. But did you have to do any of that on call too then at that?
Yeah, I did so the company I went to, I guess the third company. So it was like from 2002 to 2007.
Why are you bouncing, Tim? Why you're here for a year, then you're here for a year, and you're here for a year?
Oh, well, that was, I mean, I was like starting, like it was like completely career change, right? And so like, finding like what's working. And then it was also like getting better jobs, right? Like, so like by the third switch, actually was hired as a system administrator, for a small company in Ohio. And they were running Unix machines. I mean, it was only a handful, right? Like half a dozen maybe. But it was a mix of SCO Linux and Linux, or SCO Unix.
How are you finding these jobs? Are you looking in the paper? Are people coming to you?
I think it was probably Monster or whatever. Monster was around then. I don't remember if it was Monster or something like it. It may have been actually at that time. It may have actually just been the job ads, but they were looking at them digitally.
Were you getting phone calls from recruiters? Because that was a big thing at the time, to get a phone call from a recruiter.
No, I mean I do now, but like not then.
So you're looking, like, what's interesting to me is you have this job, you're learning, but you're still like looking for something more, something better, bigger paycheck.
Yeah, I think at the time, like it was because, I started out in the help desk, got a second help desk job that was like better pay. And then the third job was like, system administration, more responsibility, more along the lines of like what I was interested in doing. And I did that for like 4 years. And then that was where kind of also got into some programming because I was like trying to automate things. And then ultimately after that, I ended up at Google. And I was there for 9 years.
Okay, hold on. So this progression from 2000, when did you start Google? 2006?
2007.
2007. So the 7-year progression to Google is interesting because you have a lot of these jobs and you're getting more and more responsibility as you go. What makes you decide to apply to Google? Because that's not easy to do if you don't have some sort of inside track, right?
Oh, it was just a lark. Like I had no expectation of anything. I sent my resume.
But was this a job you saw on a job board, or you got a recruiting email?
No, I'm sure it was. I saw it no, it wasn't a recruiting email. I saw it somewhere. It's like, hey, come work at Google or something. And I thought like, okay, sure, why not? What's worst going to happen? They're never going to call me. And then like a year later, it was like a year. I mean, I sent it in and forgot about it. And just kept doing the work I was doing. Like a year later, I got an email from a recruiter at Google. And I remember my first thought was like, okay, this is like somebody spoofing like Google. Yeah, it's like, no, why are they? No, yeah, it's like they're not, like this isn't real. Like nobody's sending me an email from Google asking me if I want to apply for a job there. So I let it sit for a day, and then I kind of came back to it, and I looked, and it's like, okay, I looked at the phone number from the recruiter and looked up the area code, and I was like, okay, well this, it is Mountain View area code, so okay, maybe this is real. And so it just went from there.
So you said, I'm just going to apply, and I'm not going to get it, so I'm not going to have to deal with it. But if I don't apply, I won't know.
Yeah.
So you apply. Yeah. The next thing you know, you're going through the interview. Now, how many months did it take to get through the whole interviewing process?
Probably at least 3. Because I think I went out. I remember doing phone screen. This was like late 2006, so probably October, November. And by like around Thanksgiving of that year, I actually flew out to Mountain View for an on-site interview. And that was like a whole day. Like that was exhausting.
And you were applying for like an SRE kind of position for one of their.
Yeah, it was actually at the time I was applying for like a system administration job, and it was within a team that at the time was called SysOps. So it was more of like internal SRE.
So they offer you this job, right? The money must have been pretty good. Now you have to tell your wife, we're moving to Mountain View?
No, actually it wasn't. It wasn't. It was a pay cut to actually go.
Really? And you still chose to move?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. Yeah. What are your thoughts on? Yeah.
Well, I mean, it was an opportunity, right? It was like, okay, like, take a pay cut for some period of time, and then, there's obviously going to be benefits that come from that down the road. It's not just a short term, like, oh, okay, well, it's a pay cut. I can't do that. I have to stay where I am. Um, you know, I could see down the road further. It's like, okay, well, like short term, it's a pay cut, but then like, ultimately, because it wasn't just the salary either, right? Like I was getting stock grants were part of that. It was also, learning. I mean, there was, a huge.
But you have to uproot now. You have to move again. Your wife's got to find another job again. What was she thinking?
Well, that's a good question. I think, we talked about it. It wasn't just like I came in and I was like, oh, hey, okay, we're doing this. I mean, we had the conversation, kind of, it wasn't an immediate decision either. We kind of went back and forth, like, do we want to do this? I should say the other piece of that is that we weren't actually moving to California. We actually, the team that I accepted the position for was going to be in Atlanta. And that was actually a decision too, because we could have gone to California, but given the pay cut, it was like, yeah, okay, we can't make that happen. Like California's just crazy expensive. Like there's just no way. So, we decided, okay, well, if we're going to do this, like Atlanta makes sense. So, we started thinking through, just kind of like, what are the pieces there? And, ultimately we just decided like, yeah, okay, well, this makes sense.
Atlanta's a completely different city. You haven't lived in a city like Atlanta yet at that point, right? I mean, this is also a big change.
Yeah. No, neither one of us had, but we're kind of nomadic, I guess, in some ways. I mean, we moved a lot, even, we've now been in the same, we've lived in New Jersey now for 10 years. We've been in the same house for 6 years.
I'll send some boxes for you because I think it's time. So I find it interesting that your wife, I'm sure she started having a career again there. So she's uprooting her career too, right?
Well, she went back to school too. She went back to school in 2009. She's actually finishing up now. She's working on her dissertation in history of science and technology.
So she's gonna have a PhD.
Yeah.
Very soon.
She actually does want to teach, like at the college level.
All right. So in 2007, you moved to Atlanta to take this job at Google. You still at Google today?
Nope. I left in 2016. So I was there for 9 years. Yeah.
And I imagine over those 9 years, you moved a lot around inside of Google. And eventually you got into Borg or something? You got into orchestration? You got into, like, where did all that learning kind of go to?
So it's kind of interesting. I actually didn't move around teams very much, which was, hindsight was a mistake. But it was still interesting though. Like my first team, I worked on something called, or I worked on the team that built this system called Ganeti. And it was actually, we used it. It was internally. It was basically a big Python wrapper around Zen, the virtualization hypervisor. So we were building. I joined in 2007. I think it was 2005, 2006. They'd already built there's a team in Zurich that had already built kind of the initial version of this, and we were using it to, to virtualize physical machines, because we had internally. We had a bunch of teams that needed, like especially for internal stuff, like people weren't running their applications, their services on Borg. People were still getting, like, they were requesting physical machines, and like, hey, I need 3 machines to run my service. Like, can you rack these in the data center for me and tell me what's the IP and the login and all this kind of stuff. And so my team was responsible for kind of building out this internal system to virtualize all of that. So people started, could use VMs instead of requesting physical machines. And so there's kind of two pieces of that, right? This was like we had like the developer team that was in Zurich that was actually writing the code. Like I said, it was like, effectively it was a big Python wrapper around Zen. And then there was the operations, or kind of the more traditional like SRE team, where we were actually like responsible for the operational side of it. Like, we were like, provisioning and building the clusters, the physical machines, getting them racked, cabled, labeled. And then, figuring out what tools do we need to like, install the OS, install Kubernetes, bring everything up. And then, how do we manage provisioning? It's like, great, we've got this, but now how do we provision this?
Yeah, it's a big logistical. There's a lot of logistics, and the more you can automate that, the better.
Yeah.
For everybody, right? Yeah, that's a big job.
That was I think probably my first introduction into like, it wasn't technically an orchestration system like Borg would be, or like Kubernetes or Nomad or anything like that, but it was a similar problem space there, right? It's like, how do you, user X comes and says they need 5 VMs. Like, okay, well, where do you put them? So it was similar. And while I didn't write the code for Kubernetes, I had access to it. I looked at the code. I think I made it like a small, like 1 line or something commit to it. But I was fascinated by just how to again, kind of like how does this work? What are the different pieces for this? And then eventually I was involved with like writing tooling to help us automate some of the provisioning stuff. Ultimately worked on a couple different iterations of that with other folks, and we were building our tools, right? And like we were automating this stuff, but we were running the tooling and the automation we were running to like provision the VMs was also running on the same, they were VMs and running on VMs themselves on the same clusters. Excuse me. But then eventually we had somebody that joined our team from that had worked on the operational side and on the production side of things. And as we were kind of rewriting the next version of the tooling, he was like, hey, we're going to run this on Borg, because then we don't have to deal with all this like VM stuff and provisioning, and for our service, like we don't need to do that. And I remember that like it was just a light bulb, because when we made that change and we started running our tooling and our service on Borg, it was like, oh my God, this is so much easier to like, there's like a whole layer of stuff that we now don't have to think about.
You were almost rewriting your own version, a simpler version of Borg. It sounds like almost.
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah,
Borg does a lot more than that, but at least the layer one of this orchestration is all about the provisioning, right?
Right.
Give me some compute power. Now how do we leverage it? So I feel like you were kind of almost writing a small version of that.
Yeah. Like I said, I wasn't the one actually writing that code, but, I worked on the team that did the operational side of it, and, definitely had exposure to, to the conversations that we had around that, which was,
So what happens in 16? Now you've done 9 years here. What happens in?
Just decided it was time to leave. It was, when you're there, you're only working on Google stuff, right? Or you're only using like everything is built up. Maybe it's changed since then, but like at the time, it was like, you're only working with like Google tech, right? Like everything's written in house. You're not using like, for the most part, you're not working with like other like open source stuff that like.
So you feel like you're falling behind a little bit on what's happening in the industry if you're locked in this box?
Yeah, I guess that's a good way to put it, right? Like if I, realizing like, hey, if I wanted to like, work somewhere else eventually, it's like, and that did happen. I remember interviewing and like places asking like, okay, well, hey, are you familiar with this or that? I'm like, no, it's like, this is how, I can explain to you what we've done, the projects that I've worked on at Google and how we do things. But, yeah, if you ask me, like, if you're familiar with, I'm just making stuff up, but I don't know. Are you familiar with, I can't even think of what it would have been at the time, but like.
Well, even at the time, at 2016, I think HashiCorp's already got some versions of Terraform and stuff out by then. Nomad. but Chef and Puppet and other things that maybe, I don't know what year this tooling came out, but I can see what you're saying, right? They're trying to use what's available, and you're like, no, I don't get to use that, right? I don't get to use this. I don't get to do that.
It's just kind of I don't know. Again, I think, kind of like personally, like I said, my wife and I kind of are nomads. I think, and probably like professionally, there's a little bit of like nomadism that kind of bleeds over into that too, of just being interested in different things and like, wanting to do, I don't know, just do different things, different challenges.
So what job do you take in 16? Who hires you out of Google in 2016?
2016, I joined a small company that was doing, what were we doing? It was kind of like a customer management, like CMS for financial advisors.
And that's in Atlanta?
No, that was here because 2012 I moved to relocated to the New Jersey area because my team did some reorganization, and we were kind of spread all over the place, and so we consolidated on the New York and Zurich offices.
So you moved to New Jersey, but you had to go to the Chelsea office or something every day?
Yep.
Okay. Gotcha. So now you're in New Jersey. Is this new job, again, more operational, or are you doing more programming? Why this job?
Yeah, that was operational. I think it was just the first step of like leaving Google. It's like I didn't want to draw it out. And like, it's like, oh, look for the perfect, like, oh, I need the perfect one. I mean, I kind of figured like, okay, it might take a while to find like a company, a job that like was a good fit after being at some place for so long. So I decided, it's like, okay, well, you got to take a first step. You got to start somewhere.
But having Google on your resume is pretty powerful, isn't it? I mean, you walk into an interview and you say, I've been at Google for 10 years. Everybody's a little bit in awe, right? Like, I still meet Google engineers, and I'm always like, I think it's impressive just because of what it takes to get in there, right?
Yeah. I think there's, it definitely, obviously doesn't hurt, right? It's definitely helpful. And it certainly is like getting a foot in the door. But yeah, I would say the first company was like, it was a first step, right? Like, okay, I've got to start somewhere. Like, let's do this. I was also going to be the only person that was like, SRE / well, I guess at the time, DevOps kind of, that term kind of gained some momentum. And so I think the role was it might have actually been DevOps.
But you're the only one, so you had an opportunity to kind of architect and design how things were going to be basically managed, and production was going to be managed and all of that. So,
but that was an interesting experience though, just because it was interesting because it didn't go how I thought it was going to go, I guess is the way to say it. Like, I'm coming in from Google and I'm like, oh, this is the way we did things there. Especially I think on the SRE side where things were pretty, how do I say it? I want to say rigorous, but I don't know, that sounds kind of arrogant, but
I think intense. I would think it was intense at Google, right? Because of scale.
Yeah, SRE, operations were taken seriously, right? And that, not to say that other people don't, but it's like there's definitely a rigor to it, right? It was like you were regularly on call. There was a process for, at least the teams I were on, and I have a feeling, like given the people that I talked to, like this was kind of the norm, like,
It was taken seriously, and I think it's fair, right? Like that was taken seriously. That's fair.
Right. It's like you were on call. You had, there were certain things you did. You were responsible for things. When there were incidents, you wrote postmortems. And that's not to say that everything was perfect, but there was certainly there was a rigor. There was a way that we did that, and that kind of gets ingrained in you. And so, I remember being at this company for, God, I want to say it was only like a couple weeks, maybe not even like maybe a month. I don't know, but we had all these problems. I remember one day, like coming in and, we were talking about, and we were, kind of just shooting the shit and complaining about like, oh, we've got all these problems. And I said like, okay, well, let's enumerate the problems. Like, let's just, we were sitting right behind a whiteboard. It's like, let's just list them out. And I think in a matter of like minutes, we listed like 10 things. And I said like, okay, like, look at what we just did in a matter of minutes. Like, this is a problem. Like, we need to address this. And I was like, okay, like when we had something like this to Google, like we would have, we had this thing called like, I think it was like, I forget what, code yellow and code red. It was basically like in a way to say like, okay, hey, the situation's like untenable. We can't keep going forward like this. So we're going to stop. The idea would be like you'd stop. You know, depending on what service you were working on, you might like if there's a code yellow, you might like freeze. New features. No new feature work because we're going to work on fixing the bugs and fixing operational problems or resource problems or whatever with the existing system until we get until we meet some criteria, right? Like again, depending on what the service was, it might be like it might be like I'm making this up, but like there are no like
yeah, you're labeling things as critical, everything stops, yellow, everything new stops, whatever the next color is. So because if not, you don't set the right expectations.
Right. So so I remember again, like I'd been here, and we were only like 10 engineers, but we took a couple minutes, we listed out what problems we thought we were experiencing. We had like 10, maybe a little bit more than 10. I'm like, okay, like at Google we would have done we probably would have called this like a code yellow, and we would have stopped new feature work, and we would have fixed these. So I tried doing that, and it kind of worked for like a couple weeks, maybe a month, where because we did actually identify a few things, and we did do some like focused work on like fixing a few things. But then it's kind of like the nature of those things, right? Like they do kind of take a little bit longer because these aren't, they're typically not like easy fixes, because if they were easy fixes, you would have already done them most likely. It was stuff that probably took some research. You'd have to figure out like, okay, this thing is happening. Why is this happening? When is it happening? What are the potential, what could potentially be causing this?
And they want to move the business forward because they can't stack, right? That's the thing, the problem, right?
Yeah. It's a startup. And so it's like, okay, well, we can't completely like freeze like new work or freeze feature work, because it's like, well, that's, we're a startup. Like we need,
You could do that week every 6 weeks. You might be able to get a week where we freeze, but you're never going to be able to like stop everything for 2 months. And because they allowed it to progress the moment they saw it, now it becomes untenable. There's nothing you can do about it, right?
Yeah. So that was, that's kind of interesting experience, again, kind of being, in some ways it's kind of like coming out of school, right? You're coming out of school and you've like, you have these ideas. It's like you've been trained. It's like, oh, this is what happened in this situation. But then it's like, you go into kind of quote the real world, and it's like, oh, that doesn't, they're different, in reality. There's
different goals and realities. Yeah. Revenue is important here. You don't have a printing machine in the back where.
Right. When it's like Google's like, it's like, we've got more money than like, most countries put together. So like,
revenue's got to come in or nobody's getting paid, and there's a constant balance. So you leave this job, now it's 2016, you leave there and like maybe a year later, 2017.
Yeah.
17, we're now in 22, so there's 5 years. We got like 15 minutes left to cover the next 5 years here. So what happens after that? Is it just another type of job like this, another type of company? Like what's going on between then and where you are now?
Yeah, I hopped around a little bit. Actually, the next company after that I really liked. It was we're doing DNS, kind of DNS as a service. I actually, the people that I worked with there, I really enjoyed. That was just a burnout situation, like straight up, like I was on a small DevOps team, SRE team, and on call was like super intense. And because it was 3 of us, we were on call like every 3 weeks, and so that was just that was a burnout situation. So I hopped around a little bit there. From there, and then like I ended up at Voltus. Like I started Voltus a year ago.
See, I don't want your job because because of the on-call. At least back in the 90s, I was getting paid extra to be on call those hours. But I said that to somebody a couple of years ago, and they thought I had 2 heads. Like, what do you mean you got extra money for that? I'm like, yeah.
It's kind of interesting. I think depending on where you are, different companies have different takes on that. Like we're working on, because the team I'm on now is like we're building the infrastructure team from scratch, right? Like it was, because it's a startup, right? Like when I started, there was the only person that worked on infrastructure or really kind of gave it like much thought, was my boss, who's the director of engineering. And so I was, I came in, I was the first person, more or less the first person that was working mostly on infrastructure. We've hired 2 more people since. And so we're looking at on call, how we organize that. And the pay issue is something that's coming up. And I will say our company's actually, I feel like our company's like, we're really good about like thinking about the employee and making sure, like thinking about things like, we don't want to burn people out. We want people to be happy. We want, we have these, as a business, we need, obviously we need the business to be up and running so we can make money. But, we also value our employees. We value our teammates. So we're having that conversation. Going back to Google, we got paid for on-call. That was like not a question. That it was just standard. But every place I've been in between, there's been kind of this like, it's been back and forth, right? Like some places would pay you, some, wouldn't. It just kind of depended on the company and the culture.
So where you are now, I want to get back to orchestra. I want to take the next 15 minutes to talk about orchestration and the book you're writing and all that. You've chosen to use Nomad where you are right now, or Kubernetes. Like what orchestration?
Yeah, we're using Nomad. This is the second place that I've worked at where we've used Nomad. I've been a place.
Do you run your own data centers, or are you still running in the cloud?
No, we're running on AWS.
So you're on AWS, but instead of using Kubernetes, managed Kubernetes services there, you're still getting your own machines or VMs, however you're doing that.
Yeah, we just run everything on VMs. Well, we run the cluster on VMs, yeah.
And you're using Nomad as your orchestration system for that.
Yep. This is the second company I've been at where we've done that. Yeah, that wasn't my decision. It was when I got here, we'd already had, Nomad was already in place. I will say, I have a feeling I know where you're going with this, but I think as far as like, making that decision, is that where you're going?
I think it's, if we could just spend 2 minutes here, right? Because we have this entire industry that I think is feeling peer pressure.
Oh, for sure.
To run on Kubernetes.
Oh, for sure. It's totally.
And I teach Kubernetes. I think there's I think you need some form of orchestration for any production system, right? Some form of it, which could be as much as a script deploying things, okay? So, but there's definitely peer pressure to use Kubernetes, especially if you're going to run in the cloud. And you're not, right? You're using Nomad in the cloud. And so I think for 2 minutes, it would be kind of interesting to get some sense of, if you could answer this question, where you feel Nomad is potentially better, or I don't know. I don't know the question I want to ask.
Yeah, no, I know where you're coming from. Because I've actually been thinking a lot about this, especially with writing the book, and even before that, just given, I think my work history, it's kind of something I've been thinking about for a while in various forms. But no, I think, it's all a matter, it all comes back to what are you trying to accomplish, right? Like that's, in different businesses, different teams are going to have different answers to that question. I don't think there's a one size fits all answer to this. This is a problem I have with, like, I think the whole Kubernetes thing is where it, like as an industry, I think folks are trying to make it be one size fits all, where it's like, oh, well, if you need to choose an orchestration system like Kubernetes, that's the only option. And I've been at shops where I've worked with both, right? I will say the nice thing about Nomad is its simplicity, right? And that's the whole, that's kind of what, that's like HashiCorp's like marketing around it too, right? It's like simple. It's a single binary. It's pretty straightforward to reason about. If you contrast it with Kubernetes, like the other day, for example, I went through this exercise where it was like, okay, I haven't touched Kubernetes in a couple of years. Let me install it locally, try to get it up and running. Let's just see what's involved with that. And I think it was like, I don't remember the exact number of steps. I think I followed this like somebody's blog, and I think they had it listed as like 4 steps, but actually like within each step, there was like, multiple like sub steps. And it was also, even before even just installing it, it was like you had like 4, I think there were 4 different ways to run it locally, right? Like you could run Minikube, you could install it.
I use Kind.
Oh, that was the other one. Yeah. So there's Kind, there's Minikube.
Kubernetes in a container.
I feel like there were 2 other things, and I don't remember what they are off the top of my head.
But that's like local development stuff, right? Which is great, but production's a whole nother world, right?
but well, right. This is just my point. Is just that, like, even just to do something, like to do the simplest possible thing, right? Like to run it locally on my machine, just so I could, if I wanted to do like local development, figure out how I would deploy my thing to like Kubernetes or some orchestration system. Like it was like multiple steps. Like in step 0 actually is even how, I have to pick between like Kind, Minikube, and like I said, there were either 3 or 2 other ones that I don't remember. So I have to make that decision. And then within each one, it's like, I've got, there are multiple tools that, I could use kubectl, I can use kubectx to change context. There's the complication around.
There's a learning curve, right? Yeah. The way I see it is, I don't care what your Kubernetes environment is. From my world, I always look at it from a developer perspective. Just point me to a Kubernetes environment, and then everything should be kube control from there, right? Like, it shouldn't matter, right? From a development point of view. But you're right.
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 sides to it, right? Like, there's the developer side, which, regardless of whether you're using Kubernetes or Nomad or anything else, right? It's like, I mean, really, if you boil down to it, it's like, I want to, as a developer, right? Like, I want to build my code, I want to test my code, and I want to deploy my code. Like, at a certain point, it's like, how much do I need to know about the underlying?
You need to understand the semantics of the production system. Right. That's where I've gotten to. And you need to know what the handoff is, right? Which today it seems to be a Docker file at the end of the day. What happens on the other side after I give it to you? I don't really know, right? Or even a Kubernetes file. But okay, so I'm going to take this last 10 minutes. So how long have you been writing this book, and what made you decide that you wanted to write a Go book with a focus on orchestration? And third question there, are you literally building kind of an orchestration, a semantically correct or something orchestration system from scratch, or are you leveraging something that's already out there? It's not out yet, right? Or is it out?
No, it's in MEEP format. So Manning Early Access Program. Yeah. So I've been working on it probably for a year. I actually started working on the project, like, I think it was July of 2020. So it was like my COVID project. Like, I don't have to commute anymore. I have all this extra time. Well, I have some extra time. Like, what do I want to do with it? And so, it's kind of like, it's mostly about like, hey, I want to, I've always had this idea of like, it would be nice, like, kind of learn, like, kind of figure out like at a deeper, like more fundamental level, like how things work, right? And in particular, like, okay, well, how would, I always thought Borg was fascinating, right? It's like, I didn't work on Borg team, I didn't write, but it was like, oh, man, that was just, I remember as a user being like just fascinated. It's like, okay, well, if I were going to write that myself, like, how would I do it? Like, what's involved with that? So that started in July of 2020. And then, and it is writing it, and I did write it from scratch, right? Like, I think, my whole goal was really to like, not, I didn't want to depend on like, have it just be a wrapper around Kubernetes or wrapper around Nomad or Mesos or any of the other stuff. So it was, basically breaking it down into like, okay, well, what are the core components? Okay, we're talking about like, we're talking about some kind of worker that, actually is responsible for like running, Docker containers in some kind of orchestrated fashion. There's a manager that, manages those workers, because you're probably going to have more than one. And then, the idea of like jobs and tasks. And then ultimately I ended up, actually, writing some like CLI tooling to actually control each of those.
And then you're kind of walking through the code in the book that you've written. Yeah.
And I mean, I didn't start with the idea of writing the book. That came later. The idea, I think ultimately I was inspired by, I don't know if you've read Thorsten Ball's books about writing an interpreter. I'd gone through the writing an interpreter in Go, and I just thought that was like a really awesome idea. It's like, oh yeah, this is like perfect. Especially for me, it's like, that's how I learned. It's like, learn by doing kind of stuff. And then, yeah. So what was the other, like, second and third question?
So now the question that I have is, would you leverage any of this code for an environment you're working in? Like, people copy and paste everything they see and they leverage. So when I'm writing code that's going to be used for teaching, I have to make sure the code is accurate in terms of the semantics that I'm trying to provide, right? So I can imagine somebody's going to go through your book, they're going to have this code and they're going to want to use it to orchestrate their own environment. I
try to be very clear about this up front, right? Like, we're not, like, this is, the exercise here is not to like rewrite Kubernetes or Nomad or Borg or anything, right? Like that's not the goal. Like if that's your goal, like, this is, there's other resources, or that's a wholly different topic, right? Like what we're trying to do here, what I'm trying to do is like basically like share what I like, what, kind of what my interest was in my like learning and understanding about like, boiling these things. Cause again, like we were just talking about a minute ago, right? Like Kubernetes is a huge thing. Like Kubernetes is like very complex, and I think it's easy, especially like as an industry where we're like, where there's the penchant for like, marketing terms and buzzwords and things like that just actually confuse things and don't actually help us understand, what are the pieces of like Kubernetes or Nomad or Borg? Like, because if you boil them down, like there really are. I mean, across all of these different systems, right? They're fundamental components that exist in all of them.
Yeah, the behavior that they're trying to implement is the same. They're trying to solve the same problem, but they think they have a better way of doing it, right? Like that's everything, right?
Yeah, right. So it's like it's like a car, right? Like a car. It's like, okay, there's an engine, there's a steering wheel, you have, 4+ wheels, 2 wheels if it's a motorcycle, whatever. But like, right, these are like fundamental components. It's not like, so that's what the book's doing, it, right? It's like we're breaking this down, like what are, identifying what these components are.
So here's the problem, and here's a simpler implementation that solves it to give your brain the semantics on how Nomad or Kubernetes. Forget about implementation, that changes. But I love these types of books. I'm reading one now for blockchain stuff where I use the book to help me identify what the problem is, and then I try to solve it myself. I don't necessarily look at their code. I say, okay, I'm going to solve that problem, right? Sometimes just breaking down the problem is enough, because now when I'm looking at Ethereum stuff, I understand all the content now that I'm reading. A month ago, I didn't. Now I do because of that project. So I love that. I think if you're an ops engineer and you don't have a full understanding of how things are going to behave, this book is probably golden for that, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's the hope, right? Like, again, the goal is not to like, my goal is not, I mean, because I could have said like, oh, hey, I'm going to write, I think I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread. I'm going to write something that'll replace Kubernetes. It's like, that's not the goal, right? Like it's mostly it's about understanding.
And you're writing again. Is that nice? You're leveraging all your education. Technical writing is different.
It is, yes. And that's been an interesting part of this process too, is like, because I think like, and working with Mandy, they have a very, they have a very like kind of like strict format about, how the book should be written. And so like that, and that doesn't fit my brain very well. And in large part just given my background.
Big thing that I learned at Manning was I used to get beat up on the why. You say something and the next comment was why. I'm like, I'm going to get there. No. I want to know why now, right? So technical writing is incredibly hard because there's no context. It's not, you're not there to fill in gaps. So they're pretty good there at the editing side of that.
Yeah, that part I think is good, right? Because I think that is important to ask why, because it's like, you go back and you're like, okay, is this just filler? Am I like, does this really belong here? Like, does this even help anything? So I think that part's good. I think that the challenging thing has been like, trying to come up with like an outline, ahead of time, right? Like you do the chapter plan, and so you're kind of like more or less your outline.
Yeah, but that can change a little bit. Mine's changed over time.
Yeah, mine's changed a lot over time, because it's like, and it's, so it's like always that balance between like, okay, well, I do need to, I'm trying to make progress on this and I want to move forward. But then at the same time, it's like, you learn new things along the way, even in the process of writing the book, right?
Well, you got to finish the book. So I give kudos to anybody who has a book that ends up being printed, because you're already experiencing it, right? It's a huge task. I have like post-traumatic stress disorder on books at this point. Right? I just finished the second one and my brain goes, now I want to do a third one. And my brain said, no, not yet. Yeah. And we're not ready for that.
Yeah. You need some more time off.
It's stressful. A lot more time off. So I'm really impressed with anybody who's writing a book, and you've been already at it for years, so you kind of get a sense of what I'm talking about. It's a massive challenge, but it's so rewarding when you finally get that thing done.
Yeah. I think I'm getting into a point now too, where it's kind of like, getting into a flow where it's like, I feel better about it now than I probably did like I don't know, 3-4 months ago. I think 3-4 months ago, I was kind of like, oh shit, what did I get myself into? Did I make a bad decision? But I think over the last 2-3 months, 2 months for sure, things have kind of gotten into a flow, and it's like definitely feel good about it and I'm enjoying it.
Brilliant. Okay, we are unfortunately out of time, Tim. I could talk to every guest for hours.
Yeah, I know. We've all got stuff to do, right?
But I love the story. I love where you are now. I love that you're working on this book. I love that it's not a general Go book. We've got enough of those. So anything that's really more specific is, at least in my opinion, better. Okay, so Tim, if anybody wants to reach out to you after listening to the show, what's the best way for somebody to ping you?
Probably right now would be email. I try to do Twitter, but man, I'm horrible at Twitter. Like I just don't follow it. But yeah, probably email me at timboring.com.
Brilliant. We'll get that in the show notes too. All right, Tim, I really appreciate all your time today. Thank you very much, and let us know when that book is finally out of meat so we can push it over at Ardan too. Share it with everybody. Let everybody know it's available.
Great. Thanks for having me, Bill. I really appreciate it.
So this is Bill Kennedy signing off here with Tim. Thank you for sharing your time with us, and hope to see everybody again real soon.